Hi, I'm Dr. Fox, licensed psychologist in the state of Texas and expert in the area of personality disorders. And in this video, we're going to talk about the narcissistic rage types. And as we go through the video, we're going to identify the 4 types, and then we'll talk about kind of where they come from, and if you experience this or if your partner does, how to manage it, how to deal with it. So I'll try to give you some tips to help you out too. Okay, so let's get started. And by the way, don't forget, like, share, and subscribe. Okay, so here we go. So when we talk about narcissistic rage types, I think it's important to realize, of course, like all disorders, narcissistic personality disorder is on a continuum. So it can go from absent, mild, moderate, severe, or extreme. Now, typically, narcissistic rage comes out of a narcissistic wound. Now, narcissistic wound is when that ego, right, that what the narcissist believes about themselves has been negatively impacted, and that false belief they have of themselves can no longer be substantiated. So that wound, it kind of sits in there and it festers and things like that. And it's associated with something that I call core content. And if you've seen my other videos, you know I talk about core content and surface content. And core content is typically this inner belief or components or conceptualizations that people have that drive surface content. Surface content is, in the video we're talking about, is rage types, but it can also be, depending on the different personality structure and things like that, it can also be emptiness, abandonment, fear, low self-worth, whatever it may be. But for us, because we're talking about narcissistic rage types, we're going to talk about the narcissistic wound that's associated with that core content, and then the surface content that comes out of it, which is the narcissistic rage type. Now, typically, core content, sort of the classic or stereotyped, and stereotypically, the core content for those along the narcissistic spectrum is fear, doubt, shame, guilt, and inferiority. And if these get triggered, right, from that narcissistic wound, whatever that was, maybe you were supposed to do something for that individual and it didn't go the way they planned. Of course, you never know because it always tends to be very general and non-specific. So it didn't go the way that individual thought, and then maybe you weren't apologetic, or maybe that person, the relationship ended, and sometimes that can be a narcissistic wound. Sometimes they lose a job, that can be a narcissistic wound. So then what happens is they engage in these narcissistic rage types. Okay, now there are 4 types of narcissistic rage we're going to talk about, and that is the aggressive type, that is the suppressive or silent treatment, and then we're also going to talk about the passive-aggressive and violent explosive. So we'll talk first about the aggressive. And what happens is, so that narcissistic rage type, that aggressive type, what happens is that they become very behaviorally engaged. They may close proximity, right, from you to them. They may move into your space, right? They may try to put you down. They may use a loud volume. Okay, but typically they don't physically engage at this time for this particular type. Now, the aggressive type, again, usually, people pull back. They're kind of like, oh man, or sometimes they walk on eggshells with them because they never know really when they're going to be activated. So a lot of times they're being very careful. Okay. Now, the next type is a suppressive or silent treatment. And that means that something happened, obviously, right, that triggered that core content. And the narcissistic spectrum individual, then they just shut down, right? And maybe you need something from them, right? Or maybe you're asking a favor of them or something like that, and they just shut down completely. Text, totally just non-responsive. Emails, non-responsive. Calling them, non-responsive. So it creates a lot of worry in loved ones, a lot of fear in loved ones, that they kind of have that reaction to it. And the narcissistic spectrum individual usually knows that. And they usually use it to their advantage, because what happens is, and this is from all of these, and we'll talk about this again at the end, is that it puts you on an installment plan, right? That a payment installment plan. But it's not payment like monetary. What it is, it's payment that you have to suffer enough to be allowed back in to the narcissistic circle. And that silent treatment, if it's somebody that you share a home with, or someone who you co-parent with, someone who you share your life with, it's very difficult when that person shuts down. And they're not shutting down for like an hour or 2 hours, they can shut down for days. But they also make sure that you are uncomfortable. Okay? Now the next type is a passive-aggressive type. This is also very common with a lot of folks along the narcissistic spectrum, is that they incur that narcissistic wound, core content gets activated, and then they passive-aggressively make your life difficult. And the way that they do that is that they go around you and put you in situations that are very uncomfortable. They put you in situations where you have doubt. Gaslighting is a passive-aggressive tactic. Of course, in some cases, it can just be an openly aggressive tactic. Let's certainly be clear about that one too. But passive-aggressive, I think it's used most often, because what happens is that you have one particular type of belief, or you see things a particular way, and they challenge you on that. And the way that they challenge you is because you are wrong because you're not smart, or you are wrong because of this, this, and this. And usually they know, because they use enlistment. That's another video that I did. They use enlistment to get people in their interpersonal circle that are more likely to tolerate that are more likely to stay with that person. And that's not a condemnation or a judgment. That's just part of the enlistment process, is that they are able to find people that they can put in their interpersonal circle that are more tolerant of not only these narcissistic rage types, but other common narcissistic type behaviors that I've addressed in other videos as well. Now the last narcissistic rage type is called violent explosive. And this is where there's usually hands-on. This is where they're throwing things. Now they can throw some things in the aggressive type, but typically with that violent explosive, it's just sometimes the police are called, sometimes there is domestic violence, sometimes there could be child abuse, sometimes there could be a lot of different components of violence that are brought into the relationship and into the relationship issue or whatever's going on that caused that narcissistic wound. And when we look at these 4 rage types, let's ask ourselves, well, why are they doing it? What's the point of engaging in these 4 different types? Now, they're not mutually exclusive. So that's important to know too. So you can go from silent treatment to passive aggressive to aggressive to violent explosive. Now some people can do that in seconds, some people can do that in minutes, hours, days, weeks, whatever it may be. So it depends a lot upon how the narcissistic spectrum individual can manage their behavior, judge the impact if they're able to, depending on their level of impaired insight, so how well that they can judge what's going on around them. And it's also important to know that, those individuals that are along the narcissistic spectrum may choose 1 or 2. And they sort of use those as their default behaviors, their default aggressive patterns. And when they do that, a lot of times their significant others or people in the household, people that are in their life, know what to expect. So we know, such and such is upset. We know he or she is going to behave this way, so it's better not to do it. So in a way, it is indirectly reinforcing. Now that's not fault. We're not talking about fault. What we're talking about is there's a reinforcement component, but that doesn't mean challenge them and make them feel worse, because inside they already feel worse because of fear, shame, doubt, guilt, and inferiority. And that's what they carry with them. And they use this maladaptive pattern of narcissistic personality disorder or narcissistic traits to manage that. It's a poor way to do it, because in the end, many narcissists end up very alone, very sad. Some of them, depending on where that rage may go, it can go internal. If it goes internal, then there's a lot of self-doubt. There can be depression, suicide attempts, things like that. But it's more often to go outwardly. And if it goes outwardly, that can be to you, your children, your friends, your family, whoever else is in that interpersonal circle. So what do we do about it? And this can be really tricky, because I think that the individual, first of all, has to recognize that their rage is a problem, that they do have those components of narcissistic personality disorder, and that it's important for them to work on it. If they're willing to work on it, and they're willing to come into treatment. What I do with my clients that are along narcissistic spectrum, we usually talk about the process, And there's a particular process that you have to use. It's talking to them in a way that they can hear you. So it's talking to them in a way that they understand. It's talking to them in a way that shows their benefit. What is their benefit of not using narcissistic rage responses? But they have to be willing to hear it. You can't just say, well, I mean, he or she says, oh, they don't want to have any more, rage episodes, but yet they continue to do so, and they won't go for treatment. So you can't force them into treatment. They have to be willing to do that. And sometimes that narcissistic wound can be the impetus that drives them into treatment, and that can be very, very positive for them. That can drive them in there. It's nice when they can find a supportive system that can help them do that as well. So I hope that you found this video helpful. Please leave any comments that you may have, and like, share, and subscribe. And thank you very much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.